It was a crisp autumn evening in downtown Seattle, the kind where the air feels sharp and clean in your lungs. The sun had already dipped behind the tall office buildings, casting long shadows across the streets as workers hurried home for the day. Among them was a young software engineer, we'll call her Anna, who was just wrapping up another long day at her tech startup. The office had been particularly quiet that evening. Most of her coworkers had left early for a company happy hour, but Anna had stayed behind to finish debugging a crucial piece of code. She didn't mind. She actually enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere when the office was empty, just the soft hum of her computer and the occasional ding from the elevator down the hall. As she packed up her laptop, the cleaning crew was already making their rounds, their vacuum cleaners creating a distant rumble. She smiled at the familiar face of the elderly janitor who always had a kind word for the late workers. "Heading home finally?" he asked, pausing his work. "Be careful out there, it's getting dark earlier these days." Anna nodded, appreciating his grandfatherly concern. She'd made this walk to the bus stop hundreds of times before, but something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the unusual quietness of the streets, or perhaps it was just her imagination playing tricks after too many hours staring at computer screens. The sidewalks were oddly empty for 7 p.m. Usually, there would be a steady stream of people heading to restaurants or making their way to the transit station, but tonight there was just the occasional passerby. The wind rustled through the trees lining the street, scattering the first fallen leaves of the season across the concrete. Anna pulled out her phone to check the bus schedule, the blue light illuminating her face in the growing darkness. 10 minutes until the next bus. She adjusted her backpack, heavy with her laptop and the workout clothes she hadn't used today. Another missed gym session in favor of meeting deadlines. The street lamps flickered to life one by one, creating pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. In the distance, she could hear the familiar sounds of the city, car horns, the rumble of buses, and the faint whine of the light rail train. But here, in this moment, the immediate vicinity felt strangely isolated. She thought about calling her roommate to pass the time, but remembered she was probably still in her evening yoga class. Instead, Anna found herself doing what she often did while waiting, mentally reviewing her code, wondering if she'd caught all the edge cases in her latest project. The coffee shop across the street was closing up for the night, the baristas visible through the windows as they wiped down counters and stacked chairs. Anna regretted not grabbing a coffee before they closed. The autumn chill was starting to seep through her light jacket. As she stood there, a couple walked past, laughing about something, their voices echoing off the buildings before fading into the evening air. Their departure seemed to emphasize the emptiness of the street even more. Anna pulled out her phone again, 7 minutes until the bus. Time seemed to be moving unusually slowly. She didn't notice the shadow moving between the buildings across the street, didn't register the sound of footsteps growing closer. Her attention was split between her phone and thoughts of the warm bus ride home, maybe stopping for takeout on the way. Just another ordinary evening in the city. But this evening was about to become anything but ordinary. The universe had different plans for Anna, plans that would test everything she knew about herself and change the course of not just her life, but the lives of many others in her community. In that moment, standing at the bus stop checking her phone, Anna had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, she would find herself in a situation that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her own capabilities. Sometimes the most life-changing moments come when we least expect them, on the most ordinary of evenings, in the most familiar of places. The first sign that something was wrong came as a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Anna couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed, but years of city living had taught her to trust her instincts. Maybe it was the way the footsteps behind her seemed to match her pace, or how the street suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement, a figure emerging from between the brick buildings across the street. At first, it seemed normal enough, just another person heading home after a long day. The stranger walked with purpose, hands tucked into the pockets of a dark jacket, heading diagonal across the street. Anna's attention drifted back to her phone, but something kept pulling her focus back to the approaching figure. The way they moved reminded her of a nature documentary she'd watched about predators, direct, calculated, too intentional to be casual. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a primal warning signal she couldn't ignore. The stranger was closer now, close enough that she could hear the scuff of their shoes against the sidewalk. She could make out more details. Male, probably in his 30s, average height and build. Nothing particularly remarkable, except for the intensity in his walk and the way his eyes seemed fixed on her with unsettling focus. She did what city dwellers often do in uncomfortable situations, pretended to be deeply engaged with her phone while staying acutely aware of her surroundings. The bus stop suddenly felt exposed, isolated. The coffee shop across the street had finished closing, its windows now dark. The couple who had passed earlier were long gone, their laughter a distant memory. The man's path shifted again, more obviously now. He was no longer just walking past, he was definitely approaching her. His mumbling became audible, a stream of unclear words that carried an edge of anger. Hannah's mind raced through her options. The bus wasn't due for another 5 minutes, the nearest open business was a block away, and the street remained stubbornly empty of other pedestrians. She thought about her self-defense instructor's words from years ago. Awareness is your first line of defense. Well, she was aware now, almost painfully so. Every sense seemed heightened. The sound of distant traffic, the cool metal of the bus stop pole behind her, the faint smell of rain in the air. The stranger's muttering grew louder, more aggressive. Words began to take shape. Complaints about women, about society, about being ignored. The kind of rhetoric that makes the news for all the wrong reasons. Anna's hand tightened around her phone, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching out like honey. The distance between them shortened, 20 feet, 15, 10. She could see his face clearly now, twisted with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Was it anger? Desperation? Whatever it was, it sent clear danger signals through her body. Her mind flashed to all those times she'd brushed off her mother's warnings about being out alone after dark. "It's different now, Mom," she'd always say. "The city's safer than it used to be." In this moment, those words felt hollow, naive. The streetlight above cast harsh shadows across the scene, creating a strange theatrical quality to the moment. A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating everything in stark detail, but the driver didn't slow down, didn't notice the drama unfolding on the sidewalk. Anna took a step back, her movement calm and deliberate. She didn't want to show fear, didn't want to trigger whatever was building in this man's mind. But she also wasn't going to stand there like a statue, waiting for whatever came next. The man's hands came out of his pockets. They were empty, but the way they clenched into fists told her everything she needed to know about his intentions. His mumbling had stopped now, replaced by a focused silence that was somehow even more threatening. In that moment, standing at the bus stop with her heart pounding in her chest, Anna realized this wasn't going to be one of those close calls you tell your friends about later. This wasn't going to be a story that ended with, "but thankfully nothing happened." No, this was about to become something else entirely. Everything she'd ever learned about self-defense, about staying calm under pressure, about trusting her instincts, it was all about to be put to the test. And as the man took his final step toward her, time seemed to snap back to normal speed, like a rubber band being released. The confrontation exploded in a heartbeat. One moment Anna was standing at the bus stop, the next she was facing what she'd always feared might happen but hoped never would. The man's fist came up fast, not the wild, uncoordinated swing of a drunk, but the practiced motion of someone who'd done this before. Time didn't slow down like in the movies. Instead, everything happened with frightening speed. But Anna's body reacted before her mind could catch up, years of training taking over like muscle memory. As his fist cut through the air toward her face, something clicked inside her. A switch flipping from flight to fight. She'd spent countless hours in the dojo, practicing these exact movements. Her instructor's voice echoed in her head. It's not about strength, it's about technique. Those Wednesday evening classes she'd sometimes been too tired to attend, the weekend workshops she'd dragged herself to, they were all about to pay off. The man's face showed pure shock when his fist met empty air. Anna had shifted, just slightly, just enough. Her movement was supple but precise, like a dancer who'd rehearsed the same step 1,000 times. She could see every detail of his expression as his momentum carried him forward. The widening of his eyes, the slight parting of his lips, the moment he realized things weren't going according to his plan. The streetlight caught the sudden sheen of sweat on his forehead. His attack had thrown him off balance, exactly what her instructor had always said would happen. An attacker expects resistance or collapse, the instructor would say, but never redirection. Anna's hands moved with practiced precision, not grabbing, but guiding. Her left foot pivoted, her weight shifted, and suddenly she was no longer in front of him but beside him. It was like a choreographed dance, except her partner didn't know the steps. The sound of traffic faded into the background. Someone across the street shouted something, but the words didn't register. Anna's world had narrowed to this moment, this movement, this space between heartbeats where everything hung in the balance. She could smell his aftershave, oddly pleasant for someone with such violent intentions, could see the logo on his jacket, the scuff marks on his shoes. Details her mind captured with strange clarity even as her body moved through the defensive sequence she practiced hundreds of times. His second punch never came. He was too busy trying to regain his balance, his face transitioning from shock to confusion to the beginning of fear. The tables had turned so quickly he couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't how these situations usually went for him, that much was clear from his expression. Anna felt strangely calm. Her breathing was steady, her movements fluid. All those times her instructor had told her, "Your body knows what to do. Trust it," finally made sense. She wasn't thinking about the next move, she was already making it. The few people on the street had stopped to watch, their faces showing a mixture of concern and amazement. A woman had her phone out, probably calling the police. But Anna couldn't focus on them now. Her attention had to stay on the immediate threat. The man tried to recover, to pull back, but his momentum was already working against him. Physics doesn't care about intentions after all. His body was moving in a direction he hadn't planned, and there was nothing he could do about it. Anna's training had taught her that the goal wasn't to hurt him, it was to neutralize the threat. The best self-defense leaves both people unharmed, her instructor would say. She wasn't fighting him so much as helping him find a new way to fall. The next few seconds would be crucial. Everything she'd learned, everything she'd practiced, was coming together in this moment. The man was about to learn a valuable lesson, though probably not the one he'd expected when he approached her at the bus stop. As his balance tipped past the point of no return, Anna knew this confrontation was about to end, but in a way that would leave everyone watching absolutely stunned. What happened next was like watching a dance routine unfold in slow motion. Anna's body moved with the fluid grace of someone who had practiced these movements until they became second nature. As the attacker's momentum carried him forward, she stepped to the side, her hands moving in a precise arc that guided rather than forced. The key principle of Aikido, her chosen martial art, was to use an attacker's own energy against them. Right now, this man was providing plenty of energy to work with. His failed punch had left him off balance, and Anna simply helped him continue in the direction he was already going. Her right hand found his wrist while her left gently connected with his elbow. It wasn't a grab or a push, more like the supple guidance of a dance partner leading a complicated step. The man's eyes widened as he felt his body moving in ways he hadn't intended, his feet scrambling to find purchase on the sidewalk. "What the?" were the only words he managed to get out before gravity took over. Anna had created what her instructor called a path of least resistance, and now the attacker's body was following that path whether he wanted to or not. His feet left the ground for a brief moment as his world quite literally turned upside down. The landing was controlled but firm. Anna made sure he hit the ground in a way that would knock the wind out of him without causing serious injury. The impact made a dull thud that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Several onlookers gasped. They'd just witnessed something that looked more like a movie scene than a real-life encounter. She maintained her hold on his wrist, keeping him secured in a position that prevented him from getting out quickly. Her breathing remained steady, just like in practice. The man, on the other hand, was gulping air like a fish out of water, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and embarrassment. "Stay down," Anna said quietly but firmly. Her voice didn't shake. Another surprise. "Help is on the way." She could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. The woman who had been filming had apparently called 911 the moment things started to escalate. A small crowd had gathered now, keeping a safe distance but watching intently. Someone was clapping. Another person was still recording on their phone. Anna kept her focus on the man on the ground, maintaining the secure hold her instructor had drilled into her countless times. "I can't believe what I just saw," a voice said from the crowd. "That was amazing," called another. But Anna tuned them out, staying focused on keeping the situation under control until the police arrived. Her training had taught her that the aftermath of a confrontation could be just as dangerous as the initial attack. The man had stopped struggling now, lying face down on the concrete, his breathing starting to normalize. The fight had gone out of him completely. Whatever he'd expected when he approached the bus stop, this outcome clearly hadn't been it. His mutterings had turned into quiet groans of disbelief. The evening air felt cooler now, or maybe it was just the adrenaline wearing off. Anna's hands remained steady, maintaining the careful pressure that kept the man immobilized without causing pain. She could feel his pulse through his wrist, rapid but starting to slow. Blue and red lights began painting the surrounding buildings as police cars approached. The sirens got louder, then cut off as 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb. Anna felt a wave of relief wash over her, though she didn't let it show in her posture or grip. The officers approached cautiously, taking in the scene. A young woman in office clothes calmly restraining a man nearly twice her size. It wasn't exactly what they typically encountered on their evening patrols. One of them had his hand on his holster, but quickly realized there was no need for it. "Ma'am, we can take it from here," one officer said, moving to secure the attacker. Anna released her hold smoothly, stepping back as the police took control of the situation. Her legs felt a bit shaky now, the adrenaline finally starting to subside. As the officers helped the man to his feet and began reading him his rights, Anna noticed that her bus had arrived. The driver was staring open-mouthed through the windshield along with all the passengers. She'd have to catch the next one. There were statements to give and forms to fill out. But in that moment, standing on the sidewalk watching the police do their work, Anna realized something important. This encounter would change not just her life, but the lives of countless others in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The aftermath unfolded like a scene from a movie, but this was undeniably real. The attacker sat in the back of the police car, his face a canvas of emotions, confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked like disbelief. His whole worldview had just been turned upside down, quite literally. The officers took statements from everyone who had witnessed the incident. The woman who had recorded everything eagerly showed her footage to the police. "I got it all," she kept saying, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and lingering concern. From the moment he started approaching her to that amazing flip thing she did. Anna stood calmly by the bus stop, answering questions with a clarity that surprised even her. Her hands had stopped shaking, and her voice remained steady as she described the events. The female officer taking her statement couldn't hide her admiration. "You've had training," the officer said. "It wasn't a question. Where did you learn to do that?" Anna explained about her years of Aikido training, the countless hours spent practicing these exact scenarios. "My instructor always said it's not about fighting, it's about resolving conflict," she explained. The officer nodded approvingly, jotting notes in her small notebook. More details about the attacker emerged as the police ran his information. This wasn't his first offense. There had been similar incidents reported in the area over the past few months, women being approached at bus stops and train stations, but none of those encounters had ended quite like this one. The crowd that had gathered started to thin out, but not before several people came up to Anna to express their amazement and support. An elderly gentleman touched her shoulder gently. "My granddaughter takes the bus home from work too," he said, his eyes misting slightly. "I'm going to make sure she sees this story." A group of young women who had been watching from the coffee shop across the street approached her. "That was incredible," one of them said. "Would you mind telling us where you learned those moves?" Anna found herself writing down the name and address of her dojo on several pieces of paper. The police were thorough but efficient. They explained that they would need her to come to the station the next day to make a formal statement. The attacker would be charged with attempted assault, and given his history, he would likely face serious consequences. As the police cars pulled away, their lights still painting the buildings in red and blue, Anna finally had a moment to process what had happened. Her phone buzzed with missed calls and messages. Apparently, someone had already posted the video online, and it was starting to make rounds. The bus stop felt different now. What had been a place of sudden danger had transformed into something else, a spot where someone had stood their ground, where training and preparation had trumped fear and aggression. The next bus pulled up, and the driver gave her a knowing nod as she boarded. Finding a seat, Anna noticed her reflection in the window. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago, but something had changed. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a quiet confidence that came from having faced a fear and emerged stronger. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her instructor. "Just saw the video," the message read. "Perfect form. But more importantly, you kept your cool and no one got hurt. That's what it's all about." As the bus moved through the city streets, Anna thought about all the other women who might find themselves in similar situations. The thought that had been forming in her mind since the incident began to crystallize into a plan. Maybe it was time to share what she had learned in a different way. The city lights streamed past the window, and Anna began making mental notes. Tomorrow would bring police statements and probably some media attention, but it would also bring an opportunity. An opportunity to turn this frightening experience into something positive, something that could help others. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. What had started as a normal evening at a bus stop was about to spark a chain of events that would ripple through the community in unexpected ways. The bus rolled on through the night, carrying Anna home, while across the city, a video was spreading that would soon spark an important conversation about personal safety, empowerment, and the unexpected ways people can inspire change. The police station buzzed with activity the next morning as Anna walked through the doors. She barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous evening like a movie on repeat. The video of the incident had gone viral overnight, spreading across social media platforms faster than anyone expected. The detective's office was warm and surprisingly comfortable, with morning sunlight streaming through Venetian blinds. Detective Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, sat across the desk, reviewing the file. "The suspect has confessed," she said, looking up from her papers. "Your video evidence was pretty compelling, but what really broke him was knowing he'd been outmaneuvered so completely. He's connected to 5 other similar incidents in the area over the past 3 months." Anna listened as the detective explained the legal process ahead. There would be a court date, but she likely wouldn't need to testify given the video evidence and confession. The detective's voice carried a note of satisfaction as she described how the case had come together. "You know," Detective Chen said, leaning back in her chair, "we've been trying to catch this guy for months. He always seemed to disappear just before we could get there. You didn't just protect yourself last night. You helped us stop someone who's been terrorizing women across the city." As they wrapped up the formal statement, the detective shared something surprising. "We've had 4 calls this morning from women asking about self-defense classes. Your video, it's making people think differently about personal safety. It's showing them there are options beyond just being afraid." Outside the police station, Anna checked her phone. Her inbox was flooded with messages, news outlets requesting interviews, women's organizations asking her to speak at events, and dozens of direct messages from people sharing their own stories and asking for advice. Her dojo had received so many inquiries that her instructor had called an emergency meeting. "We need to talk about expanding our women's self-defense program," he said when she arrived. "People aren't just asking about classes anymore, they're asking about your story, about how they can feel empowered like you did." The local news vans were already setting up outside the dojo when Anna arrived for the evening meeting. Her instructor had agreed to one carefully selected interview, understanding the importance of sharing their message responsibly. The reporter was thoughtful, focusing on the preventive aspects of self-defense training rather than sensationalizing the violence. "What would you say to other women who are afraid of finding themselves in a similar situation?" she asked. Anna thought carefully before answering. "Fear is natural," she replied, "but it doesn't have to control us. Training gives you options. It's not about becoming a fighter, it's about being prepared, aware, and confident in your ability to handle difficult situations." The interview covered the basics of personal safety, the importance of awareness, and the value of community support. Anna emphasized that her response had been the result of years of training, not just luck or natural ability. Later that evening, as she sat with her instructor and fellow students, planning expanded class schedules and community outreach programs, Anna realized how much had changed in just 24 hours. What had started as a frightening encounter was transforming into a platform for positive change. The district attorney's office called to update her on the case. The attacker had agreed to a plea deal that included mandatory counseling and rehabilitation programs. His confession had also helped close several other pending cases, bringing relief to other victims who had been afraid to come forward. Social workers and counselors had reached out, asking to partner with the dojo to create comprehensive safety programs that addressed both physical and emotional aspects of personal security. The ripple effects were spreading beyond just self-defense training. As evening fell, Anna stood in front of the dojo's mirror, helping set up for what would be the first of many new women's self-defense workshops. The room was already filling up with people eager to learn, their faces showing determination rather than fear. The story that had started at a bus stop was evolving into something much bigger, a movement about empowerment, awareness, and community support. But there was still one more chapter to unfold, one that would show just how far these ripples of change would reach. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening at the bus stop. The incident that had started as a frightening encounter had grown into something far bigger than Anna could have imagined. The small dojo where she trained had become a bustling center of community empowerment. On this particular evening, Anna stood before a packed room, looking out at the faces of 30 women of all ages and backgrounds. This was the 4th self-defense workshop of the week, and the waiting list kept growing. The energy in the room was electric, filled with determination and hope rather than fear. "Remember," she said to the group, demonstrating a simple but effective defensive stance, "it's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being smart, being aware, and knowing how to use what you have." The women nodded, their eyes focused and intent. Among the students was the elderly janitor from her office building who had brought his granddaughter. In the corner, the bus driver who had witnessed the incident now attended classes with his wife and teenage daughter. The story had touched people in ways that crossed all social boundaries. The local police department had become strong supporters of the program. Detective Chen regularly gave talks about situational awareness and legal rights, combining practical safety advice with self-defense training. The partnership had helped bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. The video that had gone viral now served as a teaching tool in schools and women's organizations across the country. But more importantly, it had sparked countless conversations about personal safety and empowerment. Other dojos and community centers had reached out, wanting to implement similar programs. Anna's inbox still received daily messages from people sharing their stories. One woman wrote about how the training had given her the confidence to leave an abusive relationship. Another shared how she'd helped her elderly mother feel safer walking to the local store. Each story added another thread to the growing tapestry of positive change. The man from the bus stop incident had completed his rehabilitation program and, surprisingly, had reached out through his counselor. He wanted to share his story as a cautionary tale, speaking to groups about the importance of respecting others and dealing with anger in healthy ways. His transformation had become another unexpected layer of the narrative. Local businesses had joined the initiative too. The coffee shop near the bus stop now hosted weekly safety awareness meetings. Other shops offered their spaces as safe havens for anyone feeling threatened. The city had improved lighting in vulnerable areas and installed emergency call buttons at bus stops. But perhaps the most significant change was invisible to the casual observer. It was in the way women carried themselves as they walked down the street, not with fear, but with confidence. It showed in the increasing number of people who looked out for each other during their daily commutes. Anna's instructor had been right all along. The best self-defense wasn't about fighting. It was about building a community where everyone felt safer and more empowered. The physical techniques were important, but the real transformation happened in people's minds and hearts. 1 year to the day after the incident, the local community center organized a special event. People gathered to celebrate not just Anna's actions that night, but the positive changes that had rippled through the community. The mayor spoke about the importance of community-based safety initiatives, and several survivors shared their stories of empowerment. As Anna looked out at the gathered crowd, she saw something powerful. A community that had turned fear into strength, isolation into connection. The the bus stop where it all began was visible from the community center's windows, no longer a place of anxiety, but a symbol of transformation. The evening ended with a demonstration by Anna's newest class of students, a group of women ranging from teenagers to grandmothers, each moving with the same quiet confidence she had discovered in herself that night months ago. Later, walking home under the streetlights, Anna reflected on how one moment of courage can spark lasting change. The city felt different now, not because it had become safer overnight, but because its people had learned to stand together, to look out for each other, to transform fear into strength. And somewhere in the city, another person was taking their first self-defense class, another community was starting its own safety program, and another story of empowerment was beginning to unfold. The ripples continued to spread, touching lives in ways that would be felt for years to come. This wasn't just a story about one woman's response to danger, it was a story about how a community found its strength, how fear turned into empowerment, and how a single moment of courage could inspire countless others to find their own inner strength.